Hello everyone, I'm Mike DeAngelo with That's Entertainment, and this is your Lost Gems review of Final Fantasy Tactics by Square. In a year when Square solidified its standing as one of the greatest third-party giants in the video game industry, the developer rolled out some of its most impressive titles to date. It was 1997, and it all began with Final Fantasy VII. Around the middle of the year, the series received a widely successful spin-off called Final Fantasy Tactics, which combined many ideals of the main games with a more strategic approach. Instead of letting everything revolve around randomized and quick battles between small groups, the combat had a much grander scope. However, when pulling back from the close familiar encounters, did Square go too far with Final Fantasy Tactics? Perhaps one of the most involved and engrossing plotlines of all time, Tactics takes place in the fictional kingdom of Ivalice, which Square took their series several times subsequently. The setting of the game has long been under political unrest and military turmoil. For 50 years, a war had claimed the lives of both commoners and nobles alike. It is what occurred after the war that set certain terrible events in motion. Despite all of their hardships during battle, the commoners are abandoned once their services are no longer required. The comparison between the rich and the poor are drawn out more than significantly. The two main characters of the tale, the player's primary protagonist, a noble boy named Ramza, and his friend, Delita, a commoner, grow up looking at things from different sides of the same spectrum. As strife persists in separating the political powers of the world, miserable events begin to take place, and an indomitable wedge is forced between the two young men. The general gist of the older Final Fantasy games remains in place with Tactics. Although not similar at all aesthetically, the soul of the game is somewhat familiar. Players control a group of cadets initially, mere children who are just developing their battlefield talents. Throughout battle, time goes by, and the stats of a character determine when he or she will be able to perform an action. Many spells and monsters are reminiscent of other Final Fantasy counterparts. Even classes that you can assign to your characters are those tried and true since the original Final Fantasy. The changes seem to end there, however. Unlike other installments in the series, because of an isometric battlefield, position, height, and distance have a huge effect on how the game is played. Characters that die on the battlefield have a limited amount of time to be raised before they are lost forever. Monsters can be fought and captured, and both the base level and the job level of a character increases over time. The job system in Tactics is another one of those facets of the game that seems both familiar yet distinct in its own way. Probably most similar to the Final Fantasy V job system, individual units must gain points to distribute among their job path to unlock special abilities. Within Tactics, the system is much more robust. Besides simple combat attacks are reactive, support, and movement skills, all which yield very distinct and potentially game-altering results. For its time, the game seamlessly mixed together a simplistic backdrop with a set of impressive technological choices. Characters are much more expressive than in prior titles in the main series, with perhaps the exception in Final Fantasy VII. Because there is potentially more movement that can take place in Tactics, there is a wider variety of character animations. Some of the special effects looked great, though they are somewhat dated today. The music in Tactics screams Final Fantasy. While not as catchy as the mainstays, some of the tunes can carry in your memory for years. They also have a more complete sense depending on the circumstances of the story. Depending on events, you would be treated to a dreary, dismal song or an upbeat, adrenaline-pumping beat. The game lacked voice, but it tried to make up for it in synthesized sound. While they came close, nothing beats the real thing. The rest of the sounds are a little underwhelming, nothing all too impressive, but bearable nonetheless. Thankfully, there is plenty to do in Tactics. Whether you want to explore a character's job path, go hunting for monsters, or unlock some secret characters, there is plenty to waste away your time on. Of course, the main chunk of the story goes on for a long while, so you had plenty to do with it anyway. One of the main issues that some people have with the game is that while things go on for so long, it begins to become difficult to sort out all the details of the plot. Final Fantasy Tactics is a rich and powerful story that takes the themes of friendship, family, religion, and patriotism and wraps them up into a lengthy arc with many twists and turns. Some people will sway from the hefty epic, while others will find themselves unequivocally drawn to it. Those who think that they will be getting the full Final Fantasy experience from this spin-off are apt to find themselves either grandly rewarded or slightly disappointed. Regardless, the game remains fantastic, even by today's standards. That's Entertainment awards Final Fantasy Tactics a score of 9 out of 10.